Good morning, Commissioner Murphy.
Good morning, Janelle.
Thank you. We'll hear you loud and clear.
Great.
Good morning, Bruce. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Morning, Janelle.
Great. We hear you wonderful. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Good morning, Janice.
Okay, there. I didn't have my video. I mean, my computer. My audio on. So now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very
Good.
much.
Okay.
Good morning, Commissioner Havel.
Good morning, Janelle.
Thank you. I see we have someone joining us by phone. If that person could please put their name to their number. I'm not sure if this is a commissioner. I just want to make sure we have a good sound check if needed.
Hi, my name is Mara. I'm a community member. I am not a commissioner.
Thank you for letting us know. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner Eskridge.
Good morning, Janelle.
Thank you. Good morning, Alan.
Good morning, Janelle. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Good morning. Another person has joined us by phone. If that person could just please confirm you're not a commissioner.
Janelle, Commissioner Meyer here. I'm on by phone for just another 2 minutes here as I get my computer ramped up to connect by video.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer.
Okay, we'll wait a couple minutes for Ezra to get his computer running. And I haven't seen Grant or Tom yet. Is that correct?
That is correct. Commissioner Wilson will be an expected excused absence.
Okay. Okay, well, as Ezra gets his computer running, we can probably start with the opening stuff. I'm sure it'll be up by the time we get to the more important business. So we'll call the meeting to order at 8:02 a.m. Welcome to all of our guests, and hope you enjoy our meeting, and those that are joining us by phone, and then also will be watching it later or watching it live right now. Janelle, do you wish to go through the virtual meeting guidance?
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner Havel. Good morning, commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for everyone. Number 1, please ensure your mic is muted unless you are speaking. Number 2, please state your name before speaking. Number 3, in general, please have your cameras on if possible. If you are speaking, you may turn your cameras off if you're experiencing technological challenges. This goes for staff as well. And number 4, as a reminder, the public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the host if need be. And this message is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. Those are the the decorum rules for this meeting. And let's have a great meeting, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janelle. I see that Ezra and Grant are now available. Do you need to do a sound check?
Certainly, Commissioner Foster.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Meyer.
Please tell me I don't sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks this morning.
You sound wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that will take us to appearances by the public, or announcements. Michael, do you have any announcements? Well, is Michael on?
Well, that is strange because
I don't
Michael
see-
was on early this morning with us.
Yeah, I don't see him on right now. Okay, that's interesting. Going through the list, I don't see his name. Okay, does anybody know if there are any announcements?
I should be the one to know, and I am not aware of any that he was planning to make at the start.
Okay, thank you, Bill. So we'll move to appearances by the public. Do we have any appearances by the public? I don't see any hands up or any indication. Okay, so we'll move to the consent calendar where we have the minutes of the May 13th meeting. We have 5 review approval of sanitary sewer extension plans, several in City of Madison and a couple in DeForest. And then we have the approval of increased transaction amount for career clothing services. Any questions on any of those before we get a motion? Okay, I don't see anything. So do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
This is Commissioner Bookland. I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Bookland. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Murphy.
Okay, second by Commissioner Murphy. So motion by Commissioner Bookland, second by Commissioner Murphy to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
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 And any opposed? Don't hear anyone. Okay. That carries. So we'll move to topics, our study session. The first topic is on strategic finance. And Bill, you're going to lead this off.
Yes, I am. Good morning. Janelle, am I able to share my screen? I'll assume
Lynn,
yes. Lynn will do. I don't need to do it yet. I'll do it in a couple minutes. First, I'm going to talk for a while. Good morning. I'm Bill Walker, Senior Director for Strategy. This is a study session, so I'm not expecting any decisions from you, but I would like your reaction to the plan that I'm going to share. This is a plan for making, using, and sharing strategic financial metrics. This plan follows from the fall 2020 study session that we had. And the goal of all of this is to meet your oversight needs regarding strategic finance. You had several suggestions in the fall, which I'll mention as we go. Pardon me. But before I get to the plan, I should make clear that by strategic, I mean financial issues that have a large effect on the long-term financial health of the district, on its financial sustainability. This session and these metrics they're not about tactical issues like individual transactions or monthly balances. I should also say what I mean by metric. A metric is a small piece of information, a number, table or graph, maybe a color coding, which, although small, reports the key information for whatever piece of strategic finance it's about, such that when one looks at a bunch of metrics together, one can relax. And I do not mean that glibly. You, the commission, and we as staff are responsible for the strategic financial health of the district, and we worry about it. There might be a problem somewhere. We're not sure what or where to look for it. A good set of metrics removes that worry. We look at the set, we see that they're fine, and we relax, we're reassured. And if they're not fine, we have an indication of where to look to make a change. That's the ultimate goal of oversight. To get that reassurance, 3 things must be true. The set itself has to be comprehensive. It must represent the whole. That was one of your suggestions from the fall. The person using the set needs to trust that it's comprehensive. It's not enough just to be told. And the person using the set has to be able to make sense of it in the time that they have available. The set has to be understandable. So for my team, the trust part comes from time. We put hundreds of hours, thousands if you count our education and careers, into understanding financial metrics. And we can also give a lot of time to making sense of the metrics values when we look at them. But as you made clear in our last session, time is the thing you do not have. We need to keep it simple. So the task is to help you trust in the metrics comprehensiveness and make sense of them quickly without you having to become professional analysts. And whether the plan does those two things is what I'm looking for your feedback on. So let me give you a couple facts about this plan. It has 32 metrics in it, and that's actually going to grow because some of the later ones will be developed and split. 9 of those 32 are currently in use. 12 are going to be developed in the next year or two, and the remaining ones are for later. Of the 32, 11 address spending issues, which is one of the 3 legs of strategic finance. 4 address revenue, 10 address debt and cash management, and 7 touch on all 3 legs. 16 of the metrics look like, for now, like good candidates for sharing with the commission regularly. And the rest of them are they're either too technical or they just don't add enough new information. So 8 of those 16 shareable ones are being used in developing the capital improvements plan right now, and you'll see them today. All right, let's talk about comprehensiveness. I'm going to try to give you trust in this plan's comprehensiveness in 3 ways. And the first is just by saying that I think it's comprehensive, and I and my team are going to rely on it in our own work. Now, as I said, that's not enough by itself, but it is good for something. The second way is by saying that it reflects industry practice, by which I mean things that we've learned in our careers, various reference books, resources like the University of North Carolina's Finance Center, Trade Association guidance, things like that. As I like to summarize it, industry practice tells us to look at 10 issues, and I'll put them on the screen here. Please reassure me that you can see that. All right, thank you. Those are the 10. Several of these are familiar parts of finance, like credit. Can we borrow when we need to? Leverage, how much do we rely on debt? Liquidity, can we get cash when we need it? So others of these are less familiar, like asset management. We buy assets and we need them to perform. If we manage them poorly, we've wasted money and created financial jeopardy for the future. So we can't relax about strategic finance until we know we're managing our assets properly. Sufficiency feels familiar. Are available and planned monies sufficient for all district needs? But the word all contains a multitude of issues. For instance, we may have future spending obligations that we have not made explicit. Deferred maintenance is a good example of that. We cannot relax about strategic finance until we have a measure of those obligations. And that, by the way, was another one of your requests from the fall discussion. So I'll run through the rest of them briefly. Compliance means with law. Incidence is about figuring out who ultimately pays our bills. Justification means making sure that our spending is yielding high value for its cost. Predictability is about avoiding surprises, and uncertainties is about at least listing the issues that could totally blow things up. So this plan has at least 1 metric for each of these 10 areas. It's comprehensive in that sense. Now, the third way to be assured about comprehensiveness is by looking at commission policies. All 4 outcomes policies and 5 of the executive limitations policies have something to do with strategic finance. So here's the list. A few of these are a stretch, but we're trying to be comprehensive. So as you know, all but one of these policies have several elements in them. And by my count, there are 38 distinct policy elements related to strategic finance in these policies. I'll give you a couple examples here. Outcome 2C calls for service charges to be adequate, equitable, and predictable. And I actually count that as 4 elements because we care about predictability from our point of view as receivers and individual communities' points of view as payers. Here's another element, quoting, avoid financial jeopardy. That is in limitations policies 2C and 2D. The sufficiency idea, which I touched on a moment ago, is also in here. It's in limitations policy 2G. So I'm not going to read all 38 of these elements to you, but I will say there is at least one metric for each of the 38 policy elements and each of the outcomes and limitations policies listed. To summarize so far, we have made a plan that's definitely going to meet our needs as staff, especially as we develop it and tweak it. It reflects industry practice and it covers commission policies. Now let me talk about our approach to making these understandable. So in the fall, you asked for a simple dashboard, and the approach we're taking is Ben Narad's suggestion. That's the new capital investment policy advisor introduced a couple of weeks ago. The idea is to combine related metrics into a single table like this. Each row is a metric, columns are years, the values are shown, but the key here is the color. Red means there's a problem, yellow, keep an eye on it, green, you can relax. Now, this slide gives you the idea, but it's too abstract. So I'm going to show you the 8 metrics that we're currently using to develop the CIP, and that we'll share detail on in a couple of weeks. So the first one at the top there gets at your bottom line. What percentage increase will be needed to cover district expenses? Then there are 3 metrics regarding debt. How much principal have we borrowed total? What percent of our capital expenses do we borrow for? And how much will we be paying in interest? We have liquidity measures for both of the funds used in the capital program. The one that's called timing liquidity is about whether we can handle a delay in revenue. Like for instance, for some reason, the DNR is slow in getting us loan proceeds. And the new projects one is about, can we fit a completely new project in while still maintaining our other liquidity? And the last one is a new measure, which we are relying on very heavily this year. Are we actually going to be able to execute on the capital plan? It's one thing to look at money, but the idea is that no matter how much money you can lay your hands on, you can only spend it if there are staff available to manage the projects. So I'm going to do a little live test of the ability of this dashboard to communicate. I'm going to show you the values of 3 of the metrics. Now, please understand, we are still polishing the CIP. So these, I'm showing you actual numbers from the model, but they're going to change. Here they are. I'll let you think about what you're seeing for a minute. You're seeing in the first one that under this plan, outstanding principal balance is going to rise. Now, there's no red, yellow, or green there because we, try as we might, have not been able to think of a sense of what is an unacceptable level of outstanding principal, and maybe you'll be able to tell us that later. We'll continue to borrow 70 to 80% of our capital spending. It is declining a little bit over the plan. I did put that in the red zone. It's my own personal opinion. If you disagree, we can change that zone later. should indicate what you think is actually dangerous. The last one is planned spending per project engineer. And $3.5 million a year is about the practical limit. We have never been able to really execute more spending than that. Now, that's an imperfect measure. It depends on the size of the project and so on. But what this is telling you is that under our current plan, we have a staffing issue. Now, I'm not going to talk about the content of these metrics here. That's the subject of the CIP introduction a couple meetings from now. A dashboard like this would be shared in a presentation, presumably with a companion report. We do it in conjunction with a high-level decision like the CIP, as I've been saying. And that both of those were your fall suggestions. We could, of course, do updates at other times if some significant event happened mid-year. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And to summarize, that's the basic idea. We're trying to give ourselves and you reassurance that the district's strategic financial situation is in hand, that we're sustainable. We're doing it with a comprehensive set of metrics, and for you folks, a subset. That subset presented as a visual dashboard to highlight problems for our discussion. And as I've said, this already reflects your instructions from last fall, so we're not far off here. But I do have those two questions I mentioned. Do you feel able to trust that this plan is comprehensive? And if not, what things are missing? And then second, will this dashboard approach work for you? And if not, what would you change? And of course, any other comments you have, I'd love to hear them. So I'm going to turn it back over to President Hubble and pick up my pen and listen to the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Anybody have any comments on Bill's presentation? Mary?
Thanks, Commissioner Swanson. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense overall. One concern I was left with looking at the example is that there are in the one dashboard with real data, no greens, one yellow and a bunch of reds. And that to me is kind of distracting, like just how bad is it with all those red shadings? And is that something that could be managed to balance it a little bit more, or have other degrees of concern just because there were so many of the existing real metrics that you had in the example, so many of them were red, and how should we interpret that? Thanks.
Actually, I have a follow-up question on that. If we were actually presenting this today, I think the main option would be to show the dashboard and then talk about each one in a little bit more detail. Does that feel like that would be a good way to address what your comment is getting at?
In part, but then it just seems like there would be a lot of discussion needed. And I know that's just a small subset of your metrics, and it's under development. The idea being, okay, wow, maybe we have to have a serious discussion here the first time we see this, and there's so much of concern. So that's just maybe that's something to keep in mind with the a lot of red lights flashing there.
If the red lights are telling you the truth, then you want to see them. But if they're misleading, you don't.
Ken?
Bill, I think your initial assessment of this is pretty thorough. The usefulness of it may be answered as we use it in the future for the staff and the commission. One question that came up when I was reviewing it was, do we know what the borrowing capacity is of the district?
Tell me more what you mean by that term.
Like how much debt can the district take on before a lender says, I'm not lending you any more money?
So I was thinking about that question all night. So thank you for asking it. Not all night, I actually slept during the night, but in the evening. No, the reason there's gray there. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context and then save more discussion for when we actually get into the CIP. We borrow from the Clean Water Fund. We do not issue bonds. We do not get commercial paper. And the Clean Water Fund is in the business of making sure that wastewater infrastructure in the state works. So there is no indication of that fund not having money available for us because we have justified projects. And furthermore, the interest rate is low compared to other options. So in that sense, we don't have any indication of concern there. One of the metrics in the plan for later on is a measure of sort of a credit rating type measure, which does get at a little bit more of what you're talking about. If we were to go the commercial route, I put that at the end of the plan for basically the reason I just gave, which is that commercial paper is not something we're relying on, or bonding is not something we're relying on. If it looks like that was going to be something important, I think I would elevate the urgency of that metric to get a handle on it. But in practical terms right now, we're not near any kind of cap on ability to borrow for the projects that we actually have in the future.
Okay. My initial thought on that was, and it might not apply to the district, but let's say the borrowing capacity was 300 million and the commission agreed that we wouldn't get over 75% of our borrowing capacity, to leave some borrowing capacity for unforeseen items that might pop up. And again, that whole thought process might not apply to the district, but I just thought I'd throw it out there for a thought for the future.
Yeah, I'm going to add two more things. It's a very good question, and it is on our list to think about, and we'll make sure to pay attention to it. The general question of how much borrowing is too much, one way to get at it is by thinking about a cap the way you're doing. Another is to think about the other effects of borrowing. And so one of the metrics we have is a measure of interest payments. So one of the other consequences of borrowing is you're now spending more of your revenue on something that is not building. It's on paying for the privilege of borrowing. And there's a metric to get at that. Again, it's not clear to me what percentage of our revenue you're comfortable with spending on interest. That'll be a subject for a discussion. But it's another way to get at the general issue you're raising.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Sarah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think this is really helpful, and I tend to love these sorts of green, yellow, red charts. So great on that. What I'm interested in kind of piggybacks off of Ken's question on how the limits are set, what's acceptable, what makes something green, yellow, or red in our table. And I would be really interested as we continue this conversation in engaging with our owner communities on that, specifically related to service charge increases, because we need to make sure that we are well representing them and getting their buy-in as to what's acceptable and appropriate moving forward. So I think we just need to make sure that we're including that in our conversations with them, as always, year over year around budget. But I would also be really interested in getting that buy-in early as to what the parameters should look like.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I got a couple of comments there. If you look at all the metrics on the plan, some of them, the metric is sort of objectively given. So for instance, there are metrics related to how well the maintenance program is performing. There are kind of industry standards for that we would look to. Similarly, the spending per staff is kind of based on what we're actually able to do. Some of the zones are us sort of interpreting commission behavior in the past, like we have a zone for acceptable rates of service charge increase. But I appreciate your point, and I agree with you that many of these metrics they're kind of a preference. There's something that the commission and owners need to be comfortable with, and there needs to be, and there will be, a back and forth with us and the commission about what exactly are you comfortable with, so that we know what to target.
Yeah, and just because we've been comfortable with something in the past, I think that's in many cases, especially with service charges, because we were comfortable with the rationale for what we were paying more to get. So it's hard to use. I mean, I appreciate the necessity of using that to move forward because that's what we've got. But I think it would be really interesting and helpful to try to advance past just looking back on that conversation to, you know, what are the mechanisms by which we think paying more is acceptable or not? What makes projects justifiable on certain timelines and adding to the overall debt burden? I mean, that's kind of how we will start to use these metrics moving forward. But it seems like in terms of the suite of metrics you're giving us, you're going to give us things that we'll be able to inform those conversations in a really helpful way.
Okay. Grant, you have your hand up. Thanks, Sarah, for your comments.
Yeah, thank you, and apologies, my video's not working this morning. Bill, I really like this. I think it's great, and I think as others have said, we'll start to understand it more as we actually start to use it, but conceptually it makes sense to me. I think one thought that comes to mind, and maybe it's reflecting a little bit on what Mary said, but I think for some of these where there's a particularly long trajectory to change them, I think on the one hand, it's really helpful to see all the red, right? That like going out as far as we can see, we're still red if we set a goal, you know, percent borrowing, for example. Let's say we do all agree on whatever that should be, and it's good to see that we're not there and we don't anticipate being there in the next 5 years. On the other hand, so seeing that is helpful to prompt a discussion and to create a strategy to address that, right? To here's our plan to get that green. If that plan takes 10 years to unfold, we, in terms of sort of like a process dashboard or more of a like sort of a short-term dashboard, if our plan shows us that we're making improvements every year and that at the end of that 10 years, we're now going to be within range, it would almost be helpful to have sort of a second dashboard that then shows, okay, we've anticipated that we're going to reduce this by 3% every year until X point where we're going to be in the range we want to be. And then in that way, it would essentially be green if we're accomplishing that, right? Oh, by the strategy that we've laid out, it's a 3% reduction every year. And so in those terms now, it's green. So it's almost, I almost imagine potentially sort of two views of a dashboard. One, you know, where we're at towards this ultimate goal, and two, are we on track? Are we making the progress that we've set up once we've reckoned with that long-term issue and have embarked on a strategy to get where we want to go?
Agreed. Thank you. Useful point.
Okay, thanks, Grant. I at this point, I was thinking that use of any colors is not necessarily appropriate because we've not set forth any internal rating system as to how we color, red, green, orange, or red, and that may be difficult to do because we're a very capital intensive organization, hence the reason for as you mentioned, the Clean Water Fund. I think, the government realizes that you need to keep wastewater systems functioning, and to do that, you expend a lot of money. And so part of that, but it gets back to I think Sarah was hitting on it, what is the comfort level of our owner communities? And so that gets back really to service charges, and to an extent then the other actors, which are the amount of money we pay in interest, and then also that staff capacity. When you were showing that if we have $3 million staff capacity, pretty much every year you showed was at or maybe double that. So that brings into a question, do you hire more staff or do you delay projects and have to then get to prioritizing projects as what you need to do? But then that brings up a catch-22. Are you living with something you shouldn't be living with? So I really like this. But I think we need more work on our own internal metrics. Now, given that, I was, like when they're talking about the federal debt, they always tend to relate it to GDP or something like that. Is there any standard or industry practice that's used in terms of levels of debt? Or, I realize we don't have a Standard & Poor's rating or anything, but is there anything that they say that your debt shouldn't exceed X% of your gross valuation within your district or anything like that?
No, I'm smiling here as you ask that question because we have been wrestling with this internally for quite a while. The desire I understand, which is there something external that can tell us what the right approach is? And I think the truth is, and the reason that there are so many metrics here is that there is not, particularly with something like debt. Now, so for some of these, there is an industry standard. But when it comes to debt, service charges, cash management, it's really a policy issue. And that is ultimately going to come down to the commission and owner communities of what you're comfortable with. And I will sort of echo the points I made when Commissioner Clark asked his question. Actually, I'm going to frame it a little bit different way. The way to think about things like the appropriate level of debt is in the consequences that follow from it. So one reason to have a good credit rating is because that affects your cost of borrowing. Well, that's not relevant to us because our cost of borrowing is set by the Clean Water Fund, but there may be other impacts that are relevant. And what we're trying to do with the set of metrics is to figure out what all of those relevant impacts might be and assess them in some way. That's why interest payments, cost of borrowing is here. That is an effect of having a certain principal level that could matter. Similarly, service charges. So unfortunately, I don't think so, but we can expand the set as we go. That's the other theme here, is that we want to develop it and make it better and more comprehensive.
That's what I was thinking, that there is no set standard, otherwise they probably would have heard about it. Ezra and then Ken.
Thanks, well, good work, Bill and team, and I appreciate your work. I appreciate all the good comments from my fellow commissioners. I agree with everything everybody's brought up. I think I've brought this up before in conversations about the strategic financing, all the things we're considering here, but I struggle, I think we all do, with how do you decide on the right balance of debt and cash financing and all the different kinds of capital assets we invest in. Bill, you know where I'm going with this, especially if you saw my email ahead of the meeting, but there's the notion of intergenerational equity and kind of how that guides where we choose debt and where we don't, the longevity of the benefits of an investment lining up as best as possible with who's paying for them. And I wonder, I looked into the initial set of metrics you showed us today and sort of where can we get a gauge on, are we balancing intergenerational equity in a good way, or are we off? Do we need to do some tweaking to get in a better spot on that? I don't know if I saw one yet, and I'm wondering if you see it in there in a way that I'm just not discerning, but I wonder if it's something we want to consider, for that there be a metric or metrics that help us to make sure we're balancing those things properly.
There is not one explicitly on that. We have talked about this one too. And before I say any more, I'm going to toss this back to you. When you say intergenerational equity, can you say a little bit more about what kind of interest is driving that question?
Yeah, or it's a really fair question anyway. Let me see if I can answer. You'd have a problem if you're having people right now today pay, cash for an asset that's going to last 50 or 100 years. because the folks in the a huge number of folks over a huge number of years in the future aren't going to be paying for something that they're benefiting from, and you've dinged the folks at the present at time zero for a sort of massive amount of investment for something that they're going to get only a tiny fraction of the total benefit. I think I'm saying that right, but so it's that that's the sort of most extreme version of the problem. And we do think, I mean, we think about rapidly depreciating assets like vehicles are on one end of the spectrum here, and then 100-year, mains and are on the other end of that spectrum. So we do some of this already, but I guess it's an equity consideration. It's balancing incidents of paying, and receiving benefit, and trying to get those as in balance as they can be. I don't know if I'm answering the interest question or not, but I'm trying to explain where my mindset comes from.
That was extremely helpful. If I summarize it, it's don't make people pay for things they're not going to use. Yeah. So I'm going to add this to the list because we haven't come up with a good metric on it. I will say a couple of things just for context. You recall previous discussions about connection charges. When we expand the collection system, we'll stick with the collection system because it's cleaner. When we expand the collection system, we finance that on the one hand, and then we collect revenues at the end as people connect. So there is sort of a mechanism for shifting costs over time built into our connection charges approach. And one of the aspects of our rate setting, I'm getting into the weeds too much, is cognizant of that shift over time. So that's one point. Another one is, this is something you can think about, but we'll come back to it in future discussions. If the district only built one asset ever, we built one gigantic bridge and we financed it over 100 years, it makes sense to think of that asset as being paid by its users over time. But our capital spending is actually a little bit different. We make a whole bunch of assets every single year. So if you look at it from the point of view of one asset, yes, it may feel like people right now are paying for something that will last. But if you look at it from the point of view of the communities who pay, they're paying essentially the same amount of money every single year as we go. So there's kind of an attribution question built into the intergenerational equity question. Is it that we want rates to be smooth over time, or is it that we want any individual assets payment stream to be spread out over time? And there's sort of a policy, almost ethical question built in there. But regardless, it's a great idea, and we're going to look at it more.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Ezra. I just wanted to add one thing to what Ezra was saying. It seems to me what Ezra was commenting on a lot like impact fees at cities and villages and that we're doing. And then it gets real complicated because you're having to give credits for future repair and things like that. So Ken, you have your hand up?
Yeah, Bill, I was just going to add on the borrowing capacity topic, maybe one metric to look at to help answer that question is the future increase in rates due to our debt decisions today. And before I get off here, I agree with Ezra's point. There needs to be some type of fairness on who pays for what when in this whole process. And the last thing I'll say, Bill, is this is not an easy thing to wrap your arms around. So please continue to work on what you're working on. And I think the combination of the district's management team and the commission will find the right process for us both moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you for all that and for your comments. I'm going to add one mischievous comment of my own, getting back to the issue of red, yellow, and green. From my point of view, one of the jobs of this presentation is to get of metrics as a set is to get people's attention and get some engagement. And the red accomplished that today.
Okay, Beth and then Grant.
I just wanted to say, I think this conversation has been really helpful, and I pretty much agree with all that we've been talking about. And I really, really like the dashboard approach. I think that's really straightforward. I think one comment would be that it's important to make sure that we connect the 10 areas with our overall policies and goals for the district. So, and that will help with transparency, I think, as well. So making sure that as we go ahead with, each of those metrics, we're really clear about how that is connected to our overall goals for the commission. And you shared that one slide with the 9 policies, and I think that was helpful. But if we kind of go back and make sure that that's all aligned with what our goals are, I think that will help.
A quick follow-up question on that. Are you suggesting to do that once as sort of a explanation, or to do it, we could do it when each metric is presented, do like a little refresher and say, hey, this metric is getting at the following aspects of commission policy?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, when we present this, or when you present it, I think that would be really helpful. And then every so often, maybe once every couple of years, go back and revisit it, just to make sure that we're on track with where we plan to be. And I think that'll help with our long-term planning as well.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Grant and Sarah.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks, Ezra, for raising that point. I've been thinking kind of the same thing. But I think that's probably worth almost its own conversation at some point, because, like, on the one hand, Bill, you mentioned, sure, if we had one asset lasted 100 years, we had repayment over 100 years, like, everybody would be happy. But I don't think, obviously we don't have just one asset, but also the terms of borrowing and repayment versus the life of whatever that asset is, I think are largely disconnected from each other, right? Our repayment terms are more about where we're getting the money from and what those terms are. And so it does seem to really hinge around service charges in terms of what users are actually paying. And I just don't see, if one of our goals, as we've talked about in the past, is to reduce how much we're relying on borrowing, there's sort of no way we're effectively borrowing from current users then in order to shift that balance. And, like, I don't know, maybe I'm not thinking about it correctly, but I don't know how we shift sort of from borrowing to cash finance without bringing in more money from users today to shift that balance. And I don't, like, it almost seems like it's its own question, right? Like, how much do we want to be paying in interest? How much do we want to be leveraged borrowing wise? And if our goal is to affect that balance, I'm not understanding how we would do that other than bringing in more money in the shorter term. And so I guess part of it is this question of equity that Ezra raised. Maybe our goal shouldn't be that every person is paying exactly the amount that they're sort of using, but rather, maybe we should think of it as an investment in the future. Maybe we as a community or a collection of communities, if we say, if we pay more out of pocket now, it will help everybody in the future by relying less on debt. That also may be an appropriate response that our customer communities support, even if an individual consumer in 20 years from now might benefit from that action. So I'm sort of just thinking out loud a little bit, but I think it's a really, really important question, and it's so directly connected with service charges, which is obviously a huge item of concern for our customer communities. But I just think perhaps the goal of making sure that everybody's only paying exactly sort of the appropriate amount, maybe that's up for debate, I guess. And maybe we should, maybe an investment in the future, if it helps everybody, is something we should also be considering.
Good questions. We will do some homework and figure out a way to talk about this.
Sarah, you had a comment, question?
Yeah, I really appreciated Beth's point, and I just wanted to reinforce the connection between goals and metrics, but also goals and then how we're coding those metrics. So seeing, helping us to define whether something is green, yellow, red, because I think the point that I was trying to make earlier, sometimes things are justified because they're completely, it's justified to spend more because it's helping us meet a really important goal. And if you can see that somehow, so I just think that this, as we're thinking about metrics and dashboarding for the organization as a whole and connecting our strategic plan better to our operational work and our policies, as you've well done in this first draft, Bill, I think it would be also helpful to understand how our finances are helping us to achieve those strategic plan priorities, even if it's a little bit higher level, somehow grouping metrics accordingly, just so that people can see, how finances are ultimately about, how we spend our money is ultimately the best picture of how we're trying to achieve our goals. So, just wanting to reinforce that point because I thought it was a really good one and would love to see all of these, various dashboards and reporting mechanisms continue to come together to paint that picture of how we're getting to our longer term goals over time.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent point. I want to follow up with point something out. The metrics you've seen so far are primarily about financing, borrowing and cash questions. Later in the plan, there are a variety of metrics aimed at what you're getting at right now, which is how does one justify spending? And this is obviously a much more complicated question, but it's actually where most of our attention is going. The debt and cash stuff is relatively easy, to be honest, despite this conversation we've had. And one of the reasons that I added Ben to our team is to help us think about what you're getting at right now. It's extremely important. It's one of the things we want to focus on.
Thanks.
Okay, Brad, before I get to you, I just wanted to make one comment that was kind of touching on what Ezra said and also Grant. We may seem some conflict between the intergenerational and maybe perhaps the pay as you pay now for some people that may benefit later. But to a degree, we have done some of this. We have our treatment plant connection charge, which is intended to incur money from people as they hook up to the district with the idea that they're paying their fair share. And is intended to be intergenerational. Then the same thing with the interceptor connection charges, which has been for even years longer in place. And that's also, to me, I look at that as geographic equity because, a person that lives 1 mile from the plant that uses only a mile of an interceptor shouldn't necessarily be required to pay for interceptors that are out, 10, 15 miles from the as we extend interceptors out. So we've been doing that. And when you take a look at it, we tried to make a balance of that several years ago when we balanced and phased in our interceptor and treatment plant connection charges when we re-examined those several years ago. So we're always working on this type of stuff. It's just that now we're kind of getting it more into a policy and how do we actually work with it. So I'll just end there and then move on to Brad. Thank you.
Bill, I thought the report was very well done. Your two questions that you asked is it comprehensive enough? As far as I'm concerned at this point, I think it's very comprehensive. And the dashboard approach is, I think it's an excellent, easy way to convey the information. The examples that you provided, I think we could argue about whether the debt metric should be red, or I was feeling more like it maybe should be yellow at this point, but we can get into that later. I think it was a very good policy discussion, and look forward to continuing that when we get into the CIP. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Bill, do you have enough information from us? I think we've had a very good discussion, and it gives you a lot of thought to ponder. You got us thinking with your red coloring and everything.
Absolutely. I very much appreciate it. I appreciate your enthusiasm, and all the comments are going to be very helpful as we keep going. Thank you very much.
Okay, so anybody else have any other comments or questions for Bill before we wrap up this item? I don't see anybody. Okay, thank you very much, Bill. That will take us to item 4B, the Commission Interest-Based Problem-Solving Training. Janice Medower.
Thank you.
Do this, but Michael, you want to make a few comments first?
Yeah, I'll lead this off and introduce Janice to the commission. What we're bringing to you is a refresher in interest-based problem solving. This is a tool that we have been using effectively at the district. The Employee Leadership Council has used interest-based problem solving successfully during deliberations at the executive team level and between executive team members. Our conversations are always around interests before we solve problems. We used this process and Janice facilitated our discussions with the Department of Natural Resources recently on the increased disinfection season, and we came with an outcome that we're almost ready to finalize, and I'll be able to share with you. Interest-based problem solving is a simplifier, and it helps groups like the commission take very complicated issues, such as the ones Bill was just sharing with you, and distill them down to what are some of the core needs, the core hopes, the needs, worries, and concerns, and make sure we're solving the right problem. And why we're doing this training now is it's not coming to you by chance. In the months to follow, staff will be bringing forward policy considerations around energy, biosolids, PFAS, Badger Milk Creek compliance, and as Bill alluded to, our 6-year capital improvements plan. All of these have many competing interests and needs, and understanding for staff, for us to understand the will of the commission is essential for us to bring forward those policy recommendations that are acceptable to you. And so that's why we're doing this training. I'm going to turn it over to Janice now, who is an associate dean in the School of Academic Advancement at Madison College. And she'll lead us through the training, and then at the end, open it up to see if there are some operating guidelines that you would like to agree to moving forward. And I think this is also timely because working so much in a virtual format, I know for me, sometimes it's really hard to understand the will of the commission when I can't see body language and we're all on these narrow screens. And so there may be some things we can discuss around that as well. So with that, Janice, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. Janelle, am I in control now, and can I bring up the PowerPoint?
Yes, Janice, you are in control fully, and you just need to share your screen and show us your lovely presentation.
All right, I'll give it a go. I'll give it a whirl. So good morning, and as Michael said, I'm calling myself the lame duck right now. I've got a month left before I retire from Madison College. I've been working there for the last 30 years, actually. and my retirement date is June 30th. So I've got a month left, and but I am an associate dean there. I was faculty for many years as well, teaching English. And Madison College also uses interest-based problem solving, and as a way to make decisions, and helped the district to learn about interest-based problem solving, IBPS for short, to learn about IBPS. And as Michael suggested, they've been using IBPS to make decisions and have conversations for several years now. And but IBPS is a process actually that helps to guide conversations. And it's also a set of principles that help, to ensure a positive outcome, like the conversation that we had between DNR and the district. That ended up being a really positive outcome because of the process that we used to guide the conversation that the two organizations had. And this process is most important when there are major disagreements, which are rare, but it's very helpful when there are major disagreements. So now I'm going to share my screen, and I'll, here we go. And then let me try to get this into the slideshow. There we go. Oh, yay. All right. So anyway, let me kind of get to the next. So negotiations can happen at many levels. And we kind of talk about a negotiation in terms of conversations that you're having. Whenever you're having conversations around an issue, especially if there is a disagreement, we call that a negotiation, so to speak. So, and negotiations can happen at many levels. We all negotiate agreements every day. So on a personal level, you might be negotiating what you're going to eat for dinner, what you're going to watch on TV, that kind of thing with your family members. And in your workplace, you might be negotiating what your team is going to work on first during the week. And then at the commission level, you might be negotiating what the priorities of the district are, or how you're going to meet the needs of the community, or ensuring that the organization is running effectively. And today you were just talking about this whole metric approach. And, that's, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of negotiations as you're having conversations in terms of the data that the metrics is going to show you. For any type of negotiation, you can see there are 4 outcomes. You can have a complete failure where there's absolutely no agreement and there's a total breakdown. You can have a one-sided outcome where one side wins and one side loses. And so that's actually also a failure as far as I'm concerned. You can have a partial success where the two entities or the two parties compromise. But in compromising, there's always wins and losses, so to speak, whenever you're compromising. A total success is when there's a joint maximization of each other's interests. And we're going to talk a lot about interests here in just a minute. And that's what you're seeking, is more of a consensus and a maximization of each other's interests. So I'll move to the next slide. There are several negotiation tactics that come into play when you're having conversations. So the first is that relationships are valuable, as opposed to winning is the only thing that counts. And obviously, we're looking on the left side of this of these columns here for the tactics that you want to employ. as you're having conversations. So you want your relationships, you want to value your relationships with people, as opposed to winning is the only thing that matters. You want to understand that both sides can win something significant actually during a conversation, rather than for me to win, you must lose. So you're looking at everybody is getting something out of this. Everybody is winning. Information is shared openly. So you want to have open, honest conversations, as opposed to this idea that if I help you, it's going to hurt me. And then obviously during these conversations, you want to listen deeply to understand the other side's perspective, as opposed to discounting, discrediting, and ignoring the other side's perspective. And then also you want to seek to mutually held interest to drive multiple options. And I'll talk about that in a minute, as opposed to power coming from opposing, criticizing, and beating you. So rather than negotiation where I've got to win, we've got to win, our side has to win, you're really trying to have everybody win. So that's the idea. So in other words, you're all in this together. You're all in this together. So a major principle of interest-based problem solving is for the team to share common interests related to an issue or a problem. And then if you seek to understand and share each other's interests, to truly understand and share each other's interests, then it is possible to come to a consensus. And I've seen this happen on multiple occasions, and where just really seeking to understand and deeply listening to the other side's perspective, you will work then. You'll develop some empathy and really work to make sure that each other's interests are addressed with whatever solution you come to. So here are some other principles. So remember, I said that interest-based problem solving is not only a process, but also a set of principles. And here are some of the principles that are important to interest-based problem solving. And the principles that will most affect your conversations is the second bullet, to focus on interests and not positions. And then the last two bullets. So the focus is on mutual interests, where everyone is helping to address all interests and that all voices are heard. So those are the principles that will most affect the conversations that you're having, that the commission is having. So we got to talk about now, what is an interest? We've been using this word interest and interest-based problem solving. So what is an interest? As Michael said, an interest is a hope, a need, a worry, a concern related to the particular issue that or problem that you are discussing and having the conversations about. Interests answer the question why, and they're often personal and grounded in people's values. So the interests are those hopes and worries and concerns that underlie a particular position that you might be taking. So it's really important to dig deeper rather than coming in and saying, this is what I want, to dig deeper and to try to unveil why it is that you want that particular option or that particular position. So positions are actually options, choices, ideas, and solutions. So we have to understand what a position is as well. And then the interests are those worries and hopes and concerns that underlie the reasons why you want a particular option, or you are trying to, or you're making a particular, or taking a particular choice, or wanting a particular solution. So positions answer the questions what and how, and they are specific actions that can be taken. So let me give you examples of interests versus positions. And these are interests and positions related to the conversation that DNR and the district had about the disinfection season. Okay, so the interest, the underlying interest. So let me start with the positions first, actually. So a position that that DNR could have come in and started to fight for in the conversation would be that MadMet must abide by the extended disinfection season set in the proposed permit. So they could have fought to the death for that position. Okay. And then the district could have come in and said, yeah, we'll abide by a extended disinfection season, but not as extended as the proposed permit. And then they could have come in and tried to fight for a season that wasn't as extended as DNR wanted. So now you're going to have a butting of heads if they began the conversations fighting for their position and using those tactics that I discussed or in the earlier slide. But instead, what we did was we had a conversation on interests. What were the interests that underlie the positions that the two organizations had? And those, so some interests that they generated, and these interests these are the interests that I took from my notes. So an interest was that the district wants to maintain a good relationship with the DNR, and vice versa. DNR wants to maintain a good relationship with the district. An interest was to protect the public health for people who are recreating. Another interest, which is a kind of a worry, that we don't want people to get sick. Another interest or a hope was that we can improve the regional water quality. Another concern was that we want to be cognizant of climate change and operating conditions. Another hope is that we really want the public to have a good perception of DNR and the district. And we want the public's confidence and trust. And so you can see now that the interests can start to create a common bond, especially those first two interests, understanding that both of the entities want to maintain a good relationship, and then understanding that both of the entities really want to protect the public health. Now you're starting to get these common interests, and now all of a sudden trying to generate multiple options to address all of these interests, and for the team to take on these multiple interests as their own interests. Now you've got a common shared understanding of the issue. And then, so it's easier then to generate multiple options to try to solve the problem or to try to address the issue. So that's why it's really important to get to those underlying interests, because they really do help for the team to develop empathy for the other side, and for the team to develop that common understanding and work together to come up with a solution that will address all of the issues. So now Michael and I thought that it might be interesting for this team in now understanding the difference between, oh, let me just ask if anybody has any questions first on the difference between interests and positions. Any questions at all?
I don't see any hands raised, so you can move on.
All righty. So Michael and I thought that whenever a team starts its work to go through the interest-based problem solving, one of the first things that the facilitator does, or actions that the facilitator takes, which is part of the process, is to help the team develop operating guidelines on how the meetings are going to be run. Okay, so we thought that it might be, especially with your knowledge now of this idea of generating interest and coming to a common understanding, which Michael and I are feeling is sort of basically your task in as the commission related to the interest-based problem solving process, is your part of it is to relay to Michael and the district what your interests are, what your common interests are. So we thought that it might be interesting for you to develop some operating guidelines in terms of how your meetings are going to be run, related to developing interests, making sure that everybody participates, and then creating a safe place for everybody to feel as if they can participate. And then, one of the reasons why we want to develop guidelines at, run the meetings is to help the team to self-moderate, to get all the voices out, to ensure participation, for you to self-facilitate, hear from extroverts and introverts, and make sure that all interests are heard. If not everybody is participating in conversations about shared interests, then you might be missing something really important, somebody's perspective that you hadn't thought of. If they're not voicing that perspective, you could really be missing out. And so it's important that all interests are heard. So we thought that, I'm going to stop sharing now. And we thought that you could engage in a conversation about some operating guidelines related to interests, participation, and safe space. And then, I don't know, Michael, I think, and maybe Janelle will be taking some notes on them and maybe even typing them up. And we thought that we could show them to you and you could have a discussion about what your shared interests are and then come to some agreement on them. So anyway, I'm opening it up for discussions on any kind of operating guidelines that you might have surrounding your interests, and to guarantee and ensure full participation and creating a safe space.
Okay, thank you, Janice. Anybody have any thoughts to begin what she was suggesting?
For example, an operating guideline might be something like, everybody engages in open and honest conversation or something like that.
Tom, just a clarifier, sort of question to make sure I'm thinking in the right ballpark. We're talking now about sort of general commission meetings and decision making, not any specific issue, but sort of just generally how we operate and do our business as a commission and engaging with staff and all that. Okay.
Correct, Ezra. Correct.
Thank you, Janice. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I saw nods from Michael as well.
Yes, correct.
These are just some.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
And these are just some initial thoughts. I know we're putting this on you right now, and it might just be some general thoughts and ideas, a stream of thinking, and we could follow up at a future meeting with some ideas, some process ideas too. So we don't have to solve everything right now, but it's just getting your thoughts of how to engage with each other and just take it from there.
Thanks, Michael. Mary, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. One thought is, especially with the Zoom meetings with the technology as an interface, one suggestion is to make sure that there's enough time for to allow for people to chime in to contribute. For instance, just sometimes it takes a little time to remember how to get to the point where you raise your hand virtually, or even just a moment to clarify what you want to say. And maybe that's partly technology, partly it's the introvert side of things, but I have found it in other meetings, virtual meetings, helpful for the facilitator to intentionally say, are there any other comments? Does anybody have a comment? Or even I'm going to pause for a second to see if there are any other comments. So to just allow that little space and time, rather than moving ahead if with not much time for someone, for instance, to hit the raise hand button or something like that.
Okay, so allowing for time.
Yes.
And you thought maybe that could come under here from extroverts and introverts.
In part.
Yes, and getting voices out.
Getting voices out, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mary. Sarah?
Yeah, Mary, you made me think about the example that even just happened earlier in our meeting. I really appreciated that Bill asked the question of Ezra as to where his interests were coming from related to the intergenerational equity point. So that's a way that we can kind of, it fits on multiple of these, but right, just even pausing to ask that question, I felt like was really helpful to getting a richer conversation, deeper participation. And so that requires a bit of self-moderation, but really facilitation of whoever's presenting, remembering to ask those questions explicitly. It just struck me as, wow, this is already clearly working, that staff's already implementing those sorts of questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other ideas? Any other operating guidelines that might help? Grant, please.
Thank you. So I personally tend to be more on the side of feeling comfortable raising my hand and say, but I've seen in other settings, it can be really helpful to actually do like a round robin and actually ask every person. And I've been sort of pleasantly surprised by quiet folks often have really good things to say, but if someone doesn't actually ask, like just opening it up for anybody to volunteer doesn't always capture that. So it can also put people on the spot. So I don't know if and when that's a good strategy, but I've seen it be very effective. And then the other thing that I've seen is actually in Zoom meetings as well, but having an opportunity to put things either put things in a chat or like, I guess in real life on sticky notes and put them up on a board. I think there are folks that are less comfortable speaking what it is they have to say, but if there was an opportunity to sort of put it in writing, put it on a note somewhere and submit it, are sometimes more comfortable doing that. So those are two ideas.
Thank you. Any other ideas on any one of these? Oh, and thank you, Janelle and Michael, for this way to organize the operating guidelines. I really like this. Any others? Any other guidelines for how you might run your conversations and run your meetings in a way that you can not only get full participation, but make sure that around interests, ensuring that all interests are heard?
One thought comes to mind for me. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand there, but
That's fine.
It builds on points that were made just a couple minutes ago, but I'm thinking about sort of some of the more thorny issues that we will get into and have gotten into, and even going beyond what Bill did today to ask sort of mid-flow through the conversation about interest. I think in certain issues that, especially where there's room for a good amount of sort of controversy or differences of opinion or that sort of thing, probably starting out at interest at the start and really surfacing those before we dive into any chance for positionality or the controversial stuff or the differences of opinion to come to the surface. I think there'd be a lot of value in approaching those issues process-wise, just head on. Interests first. Let's start there, understand where we're all at on the interests and where we have commonality, and then dive into the harder stuff. But being grounded in interest should help a lot through the later parts of that process then.
You got it. That is number one rule of interest-based problem solving, is that you start with the interest first. Because if you do that, you create that empathy that I was talking about. You create that shared common understanding of each other, so to speak, and why you feel the way that you do.
Grant, you have your comment?
Yeah, just I wanted to mention one other strategy I found helpful is giving folks enough time. So that's another sort of personality difference I've seen with folks. Some are more comfortable sort of reacting in the moment, and others really like to have sort of more processing time if you're looking for feedback from them. And I think actually that is done really well here generally. So I think for bigger stuff, often we're getting sort of a presentation, kind of one meeting, and then coming back for decisions the next meeting. Often the presentations have, here are the questions or information we're going to ask you or we're looking for. So I think generally that is already kind of happening, but I just wanted to call it out. And I think it's something we should continue to do and even expand, just really help folks know what are we going to be asking, what are we looking for, to give folks more time to process ahead of being put on the spot.
One of the ways that you could do that, as a facilitator, one of the ways that you could do that is actually take some time in the meeting to say, okay, everybody grab a piece of paper and a pen and individually think about this first. And then that way people they're not listening to other people. They're just processing their own thoughts. So that is a strategy that I use a lot as a facilitator, is give people individual time. Beth, I noticed that you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think that the commission has worked really very well together over this last year, this big challenge with Zoom meetings and everything. And I think that, I think for the most part, it's been my perspective that we've followed a lot of these guidelines already. We already have shared interests. I think that, people here on the commission have, shared goals and all that we've already talked a lot about. I think one thing that we could do more of in the Zoom meetings is something that Grant had already suggested, and that is using the chat function more. I think we might be able to, find some benefit from that if we continue on with these Zoom meetings, because I think that that can be helpful to, just add comments as people are talking. So I think that would be a good thing. And I'm really looking forward to getting back together on occasion, face to face, before too long. So that'll be good too.
Mary, I think you have your hand up, and thank you so much, Beth.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention briefly about the chat in a meeting like this. I attended Dane County Cities and Villages Association meeting recently where they went over sort of best practices for virtual meetings, and there was a warning about using the chat in a public meeting like this. Anything in the chat, my understanding is that becomes also a public record. And there might be other issues too if the chat was not to the whole group, but amongst individuals. So I just wanted to put that out there as something, because the chat now has come up a couple times, and I wanted to add that to the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mary, which raises the question, are the chats, Janelle, do you know, or Michael, are they recorded? So that is a very good observation, although on one hand, it's almost like two people whispering to each other in a meeting, but that does raise a very good point of open records.
Maybe I'll just throw that out to Amanda if you know the answer to it, and if you don't, we can circle back on that.
Yeah, so we actually have the chat set so you can only chat with the host. This was a question that we had fairly early on after we started the Zoom meetings, and then in consultation with Paul Kent, did decide that it would just be more of the business transactional. So if someone's having problems or has questions, anything in the chat just comes to the host. Certainly, if the commission had decided that they wanted to do something else, we would want to re-engage with Paul Kent on that to make sure that we are doing it within the letter of the law and making sure that we are in accordance with open records law.
I also wanted to jump in here that these suggestions are excellent. And as we move into in-person meetings, and you'll remember our format will be having study sessions every quarter or so on large controversial topics where we'll have study sessions. So this is when we'll really be flexing our muscle on this type of interest-based problem solving. And the real advantage benefit of being together is we can then design processes that allow some of the things you've suggested around group round processes, using flip charts and writing things. And when you decided to go to this format, you may recall assigning to me the responsibility of, Michael, we want you to help us design good processes. So that's my responsibility. And to utilize these principles will really help me in having a good process for you. And so I am really encouraged by this discussion so far.
Any other last operating guidelines? And if not, I'll turn it back over. And I want to thank you for listening. And if you need any other, if you have any other questions about interest-based problem solving, or about how to, really get down to the interests rather than positions, at least in the idea of starting with interest first, and the idea that as a commission, letting the district be able to understand what your shared interests are, then they'll be able to take those shared interests and come up with the solutions and the options to be able to make sure that your interests are being addressed. So it's really your job as the commission. I'm just going to leave you with this. It's your job as the commission to figure out what your shared interests are and to generate that, and to definitely start with that first, so that Michael and the other executive team members here at the commission meetings can then figure out how the district will meet those interests, will address those interests in whatever kind of actions that they're going to take. So that's sort of the idea I think that Michael was really trying to get at today, is he wants to understand what your shared interests are so that he can make sure and ensure that he's meeting them and that the district is meeting them. Correct, Michael?
That is correct. Absolutely. And if we know what your interests are, we could bring forward policy options that you'll accept, which is my job. So that is what I want to do.
Good.
So,
okay, thank you. And like I said, if you have any, Ezra, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I can't help but link this conversation today with our recent ones over recent months about owner communities. But to the extent that we as commissioners and as staff are engaging with owner communities and working to understand owner communities, why? Because we want to know what their interests are, right? I mean, that's our ultimate objective there. And I think if we let interest-based sort of thinking guide how we do that engagement with the owner communities, we'll be in a better place. And so just again, a link that's popping up in my brain, but I thought I'd surface it for everybody's consideration. Thanks, Janice. Appreciate the session today. And congratulations on your retirement.
Oh, thank you for listening. And Grant, I see your hand up too.
Yeah, just wanted to tag on to what Ezra just said. And I think one other way to extend that is for me into our strategic plan and our strategic planning processes. And I think that, is founded in interests. And I think that's where we as a commission should ensure that that is up to date and that the interests as expressed and foundational in that strategic plan should align with our customer communities and should guide policy, investments, et cetera. So I think as we continue to revisit and refresh and refine that and use that as sort of the foundation for all the work we're doing, I think that's one opportunity to keep those interests as defined by our customer communities as the starting point for all of our work.
Yeah, I think it's really, I like that there's an operating guideline that states start with interests first. Because if you could get at your interests, those underlying hopes, concerns, worries, fears, and your desires for, how to move forward and how to move the district forward, that your work is going to be very fruitful. So thank you very much. And if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to let me know.
I just wanted to add something. I think, really the whole idea of interest begins with our mission statement. And then it goes on and flows out from there to every other document and our policies, our executive policies and everything else like that. They all flow through that mission statement that we created. And I think we spent, a pretty good deal of time creating that a while back. And then, so everything flows, through that. And obviously you have subsets of interests, but everything gets, that's the main interest, is that mission statement.
Correct.
good point. Very good point, Commissioner Hubble.
Yeah.
And through the policies. So before we wrap this up, I want to propose, where does this material live that you've just generated? And it could be just a set of just operating guidelines that we use and we post regularly when we have strategic discussions. You could choose to make it lasting and update the policy book to include a process policy that includes these, which would be a more of a formal approach and a little bit more strict, because it would be harder to change. So my thinking it would be is that we just that I take these, put them in a short little document, and that we utilize them and before a session, a study session on a big topic, and say these are the principles the operating principles.
I agree with your suggestion, Michael. Keep
We've
it
developed
more.
And at the I'll say, are there more, right? Go ahead, President
Okay.
Hubble.
Sorry, I thought you were cutting out, so you had ended.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe it was time to end.
Maybe it was just on my end. I don't know, but I do agree. I think it's, well, I don't know that we need to formalize them. We can always do that later if we choose. But I think your suggestion about bringing them up, and then I think we should get a copy, particularly as chair, because it would help me with running the meeting and so forth too. Anybody else have any comments? I don't see any other hands up or anybody making a motion. Okay, thank you very much, Janice.
Thank you, Janice.
That will take us to item 5A, the CED report. Michael?
Yes, I'm sorry I cut out at the beginning of the meeting. I'm having some network connectivity issues. I did have one announcement at the top of the agenda I wanted to share with you, that the commission may have noticed that the packet this week is noticeably smaller in page count than in past commission packets, by about half. And I wanted to let you know, call your attention to that we are experimenting with the less is more principle of providing you with minutes without all the topic related attachments, that were just the actual minutes with commission actions, votes, has not changed at all. These pieces are essential and required by law, but all the attachments that you have been receiving are not required by law and are actually the same documents that the staff shared with you during the last commission meeting. So in effect, every commission meeting, we're giving you 2 commissions worth of material, of content. So I've decided that we're going to experiment with not providing those attachments, because it'll make the packet less complex and make it easier to find the content relevant for your current meeting. However, we will continue to include resolutions and documents that were changed by the commission or received during commission deliberations that weren't part of the packet. So they get included in the public record. So if, as we try this new format, if you have any suggestions, please let me know.
Michael, I have one question. I noticed that change, and I had been kind of like in past packets going, well, I've already read all of that. I don't need to read it again, but the one difference is with the resolutions is that in the later packet, they're signed, and in the initial time that they're in the package, they're, for consideration that time, they're not signed. And I'm just wondering if that makes any difference.
It doesn't make a difference. And we still have all of those resolutions. Once they're signed, they're codified, they're available to the public, and the official record, the official resolutions are available if the public or a commissioner would want that. But Paul, you can jump in here too to see if there's any significance there with the signed or not signed, but Paul and I talked about this, and there shouldn't be.
Yeah, I don't think there's a concern there because, as Michael mentioned, these are the signed copies are of record. This is mostly a matter of informing the commission of what had happened. So I don't think that's a problem.
Okay, thanks.
I think
Okay,
it makes sense, Michael.
Go ahead.
Because
Okay.
your idea of just putting in the ones that change, because that's the ones we go to look for anyway. And you're not surfing through all of the other ones to try to find that one that was changed. So make it easier. Okay, anything else on the CED report?
and now I'll transition to CED update, and I do have a few things to share that we are aiming, we as a staff, we're aiming towards moving back to what we'd consider normal operations this fall in conjunction with the completion of the first floor remodel project. Normal operations means opening back up to the public and employees returning to work from completely working remotely. You may recall that first floor remodel, the whole front of the building is torn up. The whole first floor is almost renovated, but we've improved the front of the building to provide new barrier-free access for the public with the bridge and other elements. We've increased building security, and we've created healthier workspaces. And once all of that is completed, we'll be transitioning to that time period, which will be, we don't know exactly when. We're having some issues with the delivery of certain elements of the project, which is delaying completion, but likely this fall around October, we'll be moving back to that. We will, by this summer, we're in the process of completing a teleworking policy in the next month or two. So the normal is going to look very different. There'll be folks working from home on a regular basis. There will be folks coming into the office on a regular basis, and everything in between. And so we're working on that. So I just wanted you to know that, because I think that might be good for us to time in-person study session commission meetings around that same time period. So the commission's first in-person study session, if we have one scheduled for this fall, will likely be in person. So wanted to give you a heads up on that. Are there any thoughts or questions about that?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, thanks. I'm done. I'll turn it over to Bruce.
Okay, Bruce, you're going to give us an update on the Pump Station 7 issue?
Yeah, just a quick update. Morning, Commissioners. Bruce Borelli, Director of Engineering. I'll start sharing my screen here. Hopefully this will be fairly short, because I do have a meeting with the contractors immediately after this. So from the beginning, just a quick update on the station's pumping station 7 force main repair, emergency repair, that leak. Just a recap a little bit where we've been on April 5th. We discovered the leak in the median. This is Ray and some other guys. In the work on the flex lane, water was boiling out of the ground in a couple different spots here, contained in this area. We estimated it was 1,500 gallons. Next couple of weeks, we were trying to, if you remember, there's 2 force mains in this area. We're trying to figure out which one was leaking, going back and forth. Never got that leak to surface again, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But on the 16th, we excavated out in the median to see if we could find this leak. Never found it. So the answer was no to that. Which of the force mains was leaking? It was, around the 1963 force main, it was dry. There was nothing, no groundwater, nothing in general. Above the 1948 force main, there was seepage, and it did smell like sewage. So our hunch at that time was that the 1948 force main was leaking. On the 21st, we did ground penetrating radar of the Beltline. Went out there at night, did these 59 transects is what they're called. Golder Associates did that for us. Did not find anything of concern, did not see any voids, sinkholes or anything like that underneath the pavement. So that was all good news, is that there wasn't any voids underneath the belt line. On the 28th, we went on the north side of the belt line in this location here. This is WPS campus, just outside the fence. We excavated, found the force main. We wanted to determine its size so that we could get a clamp for it. Because once we start drilling and opening this, we wanted to do an internal inspection. And to do that, we have to drill and open it. And we wanted to have a clamp for repair afterwards, because we knew it was going to be a month or so to get these repairs done. This excavation also will serve, moving forward for us for the lining process. And again, it was for the internal inspection. So that was done on the 28th. We got the size of the pipe on the outside. It is a 42-inch pipe on the outside, 36 on the inside. Ordered a clamp. Took a couple weeks. This is what this clamp looks like. It's, if you will, a Band-Aid on steroids. Wraps around, squeezes the pipe, meant for holes, cracks, things like that. That came on the 14th, arrived on the 14th. And then on the 19th, we started draining. So we have this clamp now, so we're confident that we can seal it back up until we line. So going clockwise around here, starting in upper left, drilled a hole in the top of the pipe. Water shot out. We expected that, completely expected that. It's kind of like working in your basement. If you cut a hole in the pipe in the basement, you got the first floor above you, and that water wants to drain out. And there's higher spots in this force main that want to drain out here. And we only wanted to drill a small hole, because if we cut a bigger hole in it, the water comes out too fast, and then it comes out of this excavation. So drilled a hole in it. Again, totally expected. As that head pressure decreases, we drilled more holes in it to get more water out of it. Again, this was all pumping into a local sanitary sewer, and then that would actually flow to Station 7 and then pump through the 1963 force main. So it took 3 days to do this. This picture up here is, again, more holes. And then eventually, as that head goes off the pipe, that upstream or higher elevation water, you can see in this lower right-hand picture that the water is almost stopped now. And then eventually in the lower left-hand, it's completely stopped. So then now water's not squirting out anymore. So then it's time we can cut a hole in the pipe so we can do an internal inspection. This is one of the workers from Capital Underground cutting a window in the top of the pipe. This picture here, he has actually cut through the pipe at that point, and now they took the top of the pipe off in this lower right-hand picture, and the pipe's full. So then we got to pump the water out of the pipe. We still had, at this point, this is a long stretch of flat pipe. We thought we had probably about another 100 or 150,000 gallons of water to pump out. This was after we probably drained at least that much, 150,000 gallons. So the whole thing took a couple days. This is what the inside that pipe looks like. The chips around this are from drilling through it, but the inside of the pipe looks really good. It's got some sort of asphaltic tar coating on it, but there was no corrosion on the inside of the pipe. The pipe looked great in general on the inside. Good condition in general. Again, these are 12-foot lengths of pipe. So this last Monday, Visual Sewer came out and did the internal inspection. This is they cleaned the force main. They went both ways from this hole as far as they could, cleaned it, and then televised it, and found two things. At 182 feet from this entry point right here, they found a cracked pipe. This second circle here is actually a pipe joint. This first circumferential crack is the crack. Now they're about maybe a foot apart. What this is hanging or coming out of this crack, we don't know. Water is always trying to exfiltrate from this. It's always trying to get out. This pipe is under pressure. Don't know if something got, some debris got caught in that and wedged itself in there. Maybe there was a repair that was made at one point. Not really sure, but the 182 feet is exactly in the median of the belt line. If you measure from this hole to along the pipeline. It is right in the center of the pipe, right in the center of the belt line. The other thing was that we found is this, what looks like a repair, and this is about 1 foot by 1 foot. Thinking that we don't know if this is leaking or not. It looks like it must have been done at the factory, because it's really hard to repair these pipes in the field. So, but you can see that in the background here. This here is the square that repair, but for sure there's a full circumferential crack. So very confident that the 1948 force main is leaking, or was the one that was leaking. It's been out of service now, and it will remain out of service. We're valved on both ends, and the pipe is empty right now. This is that clamp that we bought on the right. You can see them putting on here for the next month until we get the liner and the other materials. This is just a close-up of the opening of the pipe, and the wall thickness here is 3 inches. And you can see there these dots are rebar. We cut through the rebar, so there's 2 meshes or 2 circumferential circular rebar cages that go around, and then there's axial ones. All these dots here are axial rebar. So again, the pipe looked in really good shape, and on the inside, except for this cracked pipe that we found, which and that repair. So I think in general, if you want to call it good news, it was good news. We actually found something. This is the way it looks right now. We put this clamp on. It's going to stay this way until we get the liner, which is going to take probably a month or so, maybe a little bit longer to get. But again, we are confident it is the 1948 force main. We are going to line all the way across the belt line, from fence line to fence line. That's going to require 346 feet of liner. Visu Sewer is going to do that. I meet here at 10 o'clock with them in Capitol to go through some final coordination items. So far, we spent about 50 grand so far. I'm fairly confident that this is going to come in between 250 and 300. I got some pricing and other things now. So the other thing that I would recommend is that we would not look at the 1963 force main. There's nothing indicating to us that it is that pipe that's leaking. It was the 1948. So, and then just a shout out to some of the folks and companies. Capital Underground is doing the excavation and other things for us. Visu Sewer is going to line it. They did the TV and cleaning, and then our own staff. Jen's been helping out a lot. Been some midnight, late nights, overnights, Ray's crew. So I think it's good news. I mean, if there is good news with this, I think we really did find it. And in another month or so here, if we can get that liner in, we should get it fixed up. So that's all I had to share. I don't know if there's any questions or anything.
Bruce, before we open it up for questions, you may be wondering, why are we lining a pipe that appears to be in fairly good condition? And I think, at our level, going in there with a spot repair can be risky, because it can create additional defects down the road, and accessing that area. And it is crossing a major piece of public infrastructure, which is the belt line. And now that we have this opened up, a $300,000 investment to lower our risk and really solve the defect problem for a long period of time, we feel is a bit conservative, but we think is the best course of action at this point.
Grant, you have a comment?
Yeah, just one quick question, Bruce. In the photo that showed, so there was the crack and there was something is there something sticking in there or coming out of there? I didn't quite understand what that.
Yeah, there's something in that crack. Again, I've quizzed people internally what their thoughts are. It's been all over the map a little bit. The water doesn't, a lot of times we see these on gravity sewers, stalactites, water dripping in, groundwater trying to get in, but that's in gravity sewers. Again, water dripping in. In this case, wastewater is always trying to get out. So the thought is that, it's similar to if you live in the country and you have a well and your well pumps a little sand and your filter doesn't catch it, your faucets catch it in their strainers and slowly get worse and worse. And that's what I think it is. I think something got in there from the inside out and water was squirting out of there and something lodged it, some solid or something like that. Either that or when they put the cap, remember this has got a concrete cap on it. When they did that, when the belt line was built, somebody tried to do some sort of repair to it. But short of that, I am not sure what it is. We may have to go crawl down that pipe and before we line it and take that out. I asked the guys.
That was most of my question, is just is it any chance it would interfere with the lighting? But it sounds like
yeah. If we need to, we'll robotically or send somebody down in there and cut it out. Because if it is sharp and if it is solid, we'll have to take it out. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, thank all the members that helped on that, Bruce, the MMSD Capital Underground and Visual Sewer.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
That will move us to legal and regulatory report. Paul?
Yes, good morning, commissioners. This time I want to kind of reflect back on legal services from the past month, and it was a busier than normal time, and frankly, this month has been as well. We had a number of things, some of which you were more aware of than others. We had some issues with the Fitchburg annexation. There was continuing issues on monitoring PFAS developments. We've had some questions arising from bidding and the emergency related to the item Bruce was just talking about. There were some kind of interesting issues on some ransomware questions that came up. But probably the largest amount of time last month, and again to some extent this month, was an unemployment insurance hearing that my new partner Pam Plur was able to handle, and that was completed earlier this month. And I believe as of yesterday, the determination ruled in favor of the district, so we were pleased with that outcome. So a relatively lighter month on regulatory and a little bit more on the human relations side, but I think as we start, DNR is going to be gearing up on the PFAS front here over the course of the next month or two, that regulatory issues will again be more in the forefront. So that's all I have at this point.
Okay, any questions for Paul? No, I don't see anybody. Okay, Alan, you're ready?
Thank you.
Yes, I am. I'll get, I gotta click that button. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so Alan Grooms, Operations Manager at the district. I'll be presenting the operations and maintenance report for the month of May. And actually we'll, for that, we obviously cover the month prior. So we're going and looking at the normal dashboard for metrics. Keep in mind the shaded portion on each of these gauges reflects the normal range over, in most cases, a 3-year average where we normally span. So in the case of these, we're all generally at the high end of the 3-year range, but well below the upper end, which is the monthly limit. The exceptions that I'll call out are CBOD 5. That limit is brand new. It's been about a year we've been under that limit, so we don't have as much data to draw from. So that's a 1-year average we're looking at there. But as you can see, we're still well below our permit criteria for that. The other one I'll call out, fecal coliform. That's our UV disinfection. A new system started mid-April, April 15th. We fired the system up. As you can see, that one is at the low end of the 3-year range. And that 3-year range is basically populated with the last work of the last 3 years from the old system. So you can see that it's the new system is performing very well. After a little bit of last minute flurry of activity to get it to get the final touches done at startup, it's actually been running very effectively, and it's about 10% of our total limit that's allowed. So we're doing very well in that respect. Any questions on the overall effluent performance?
One quick one, Alan. I'm just curious about chloride and thinking about the seasonality of it. Is it still high in April, kind of coming off of the road salting season, and then it drops into the late spring, summer, or does that hang up in those higher numbers for a lot longer than you might expect?
Yeah, it's a good question. As you can see by the shaded portion, we have been running a little bit lower on that. So without looking at a year-to-year trend, comparing previous years, same month or same kind of that same time frame, my suspicion is you're exactly right, Commissioner Meyer, that that's kind of where it runs at that particular. This is a snapshot of 1 month versus, a 3-year average. So I suspect you're thinking about it exactly correctly. I could get you a more definitive answer by going back and looking at the year-over-year data and seeing how we trend at this time of year. But I suspect that'd be the answer that's revealed.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. No other questions on that. I'll move on to the resource recovery. Again, maybe it's just the way my mind works. It's like we're April, a third of the way through the year. So most of these numbers, if you multiply by 3, you get a pretty good estimate of where we'll be at the end of the year. So as you can see, struvite production, it looks like we're going to be down from even 2020 numbers. That trend is seemingly it's tapering off a little bit. That there's a number of things that play into that. There's also a little bit of the early part of the year. We tend to there's a little bit of seasonality to it. So we oftentimes start out the year kind of slow and then pick up. So this trend would project something out in the 500 to 600 ton range for the year. I think we'll do better than that. I think we'll probably be more in line with 2020, but that's where we're kind of projecting out. Clean water, again, we project out to be between 14, 15 billion gallons. Again, that would be down, but it's been a pretty dry year overall, as we all know. So, I kind of going into liquid processing, I said I wished for a drought for that so that we could not have to have any problems with trying to push high flow through a plant at partial capacity. And I guess I got my wish, but the nearest comparable year I could find to what we're seeing so far was 2018. And as you recall, in August, we got hit with a record high flow event and finished the year well above numbers. So it's still pretty early in the year. A lot can change. The other parameters, biogas, Metrogo production, those are running right along in tracking right what we would normally expect. The other change I would point out is in the upper right on the Metrogo cake. That is a retitling. That previously last month was listed as Metro Mix. And talking with our ecosystems personnel and looking at with the biosolids study coming up, we're looking at that may be a little bit of a rebranding. That Metro Mix is an old, predates my time here. That reflected the original thought that we would make a Class A cake and we would mix that with like something else, sawdust or wood, sand, something else to bulk it up. And that never really panned out. The market wasn't there for that. And that kind of got dropped. And we're no longer looking at mixing things in, or that's not our predominant model we're looking at. So the thought was, let's start changing this to better reflect what we're putting out. So we're looking to do more experimenting with a Class B cake. That seems to be what the biosolid study is suggesting. I think Marty is going to be presenting on that at an upcoming meeting. But so that's broken out. 2020, we've got significant amounts of Class A and Class B cake, but so we'll be breaking that out similarly going forward. And so far, we haven't made any cake in 2021. Any questions on this? Okay. I'm going to take you into an item that Michael had asked that we talked to you about, bring the commission up to speed on. So these are things we don't necessarily like to share, but it's good for the commission to kind of know what goes into life at the plant. So on May 12th, as the title would suggest here or state, is we had a TFO, or treatment facility overflow, is what that stands for at off digester number 4 here at the Nine Springs plant. So these are photos of the actual overflow. This silver hatch is exactly what it is. It's an emergency relief hatch. We put these in the 11th edition. What they do is they basically prevent, if we have a severe overpressure condition, they're designed to lift up. The covers on these digesters aren't meant to withstand a heavy uplift pressure. So rather than risking structural damage to the digesters, which can happen with severe foaming, this is designed to lift and let the sludge out and relieve that pressure. Unfortunately, sometimes sometimes will lift not, we didn't have high pressure in this case, but the sludge just kind of got up in there and lifted it up. Or I should say, I should use more precise wording. The foam got up in this area. So these are from the DNR report we submitted on the treatment facility overflow. We're required to submit a report to DNR on these and report these. We probably report more of these than I would say most plants in the state. DNR at one point had quipped that they would like to see anything more than a thimbleful we should report, and we take that pretty much to heart. So pretty transparent, that's the advantage of doing that, but the downside of that is sometimes we report things we spilled less than a gallon, and we put a report in on that. So if someone from the public just looks at how many reports there are, it looks like we're reporting a lot of spills that, quite honestly, a lot of places would just say, just clean it up and move on. So there's a little bit of a difference in approach. I'm not saying one's a better approach than the other, but that's how we're approaching it with DNR and keeping up that transparency with them. This was about estimated 70 gallons of foam that escaped here, and it's about a 15-foot by 15-foot area. As you can see, this is on top of the digester, so that kind of rolls down a little bit of a hill and then down to a roadway. And then this would enter, if it got this far, would be into our storm sewer system. At that point, it could escape the site and get into then a point where public could come in contact with it. At this point, it's completely contained within our site. And so there's no public noticing required for that. It's just a report to the DNR. But if it were to get to a point where we thought it was into waters of the state, things like that, or the possibility was there, then we would have to put additional notices out for press release and that sort of thing to inform the public. In this case, with that quantity, it basically stayed right there on top of the digester. Obviously, it was a nice sunny day. We were able to clean that up. So little bit of what we're dealing with as far as trying to detect these. One of the things that I tend to look at is and this is what would, for an operator standpoint, gas production trend. So on the left-hand side in white is digester 8 gas production trend during this period. As you can see, there's some noise in the signal as we feed the digester, it spikes up and then it kind of comes down. But it's a fairly tight grouping. Whereas on the right, when I overlay digester 4 in red, you can see there's what I call a lot more noise in the system. And so as an operator or operations engineer, we see this. That's kind of what sets off your spidey sense that like, I need to watch this one a little more carefully. There's potentially trouble brewing. It doesn't necessarily mean there's foam coming out the top. Many times you'll see this pattern and it's nothing, but it's a sign that you need to pay a little bit more attention, that there's potentially something transpiring that you need to keep an eye on. So this is kind of the picture we saw right around the time that the foam came out. It was something that kind of began to develop over a number of days. And I'm going to take you through. I thought easiest for me to just kind of sketch up the picture here. There's a number of things that lead into causing foam in the digesters. And in my opinion, I think the most important one after the 11th edition is when we lose effective mixing. So the type of mixers that we have in the digesters are what are called downdraft mixers. And so they use basically a long tube, think of it like a straw. And then there's a mixer inside of that that's down the center of it. And it pulls liquid in from the top and pushes it down that. And then as it comes out the bottom, it forms a plume and it does kind of a circular pattern. And it basically mixes the bulk liquid doing that. To effectively mix using this, you have to have enough liquid over the top, the intake part of that, to put in there. If it gets too low, it's just sucking air, or it could be a sucking foam. And that could actually be a lack of mixing, or it could, in some cases, it could actually make the problem worse. So we have a level that we want to keep the liquid surface above the intake of that tube. And so in this case, this is actually a pretty close example of what would actually happen. 24 feet is, say, the indicated liquid level. And we say we have 2 feet of foam on top of that. We know the foam is about 40% of the density of the sludge. So this is where the liquid surface that the mixer is seeing is, but that 2 feet of foam at 40% density shows as 0.8 feet of density liquid. And so the level indicator at the bottom of this digester says, it sees 24.8. So if we're trying to run this digester at 24.5 feet and the operator, the instrumentation is telling them it's 24.8, they say, I need to drop it 0.3 of a foot. When in reality, the actual reality is they're half a foot too low already, and it's getting worse as they drop it. So finding out, because we can't see inside these, it is very difficult to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I'll pause here. I can see I got a hand up. Commissioner Meyer? Maybe I should have asked earlier.
No, and sorry, my question was from earlier. It's just a nitpicky point, but it's I noticed when I was reading the meeting minutes from last time that we mentioned this in the CED update and said there was no need to require noticing to the DNR, which sounds a little bit inaccurate to the reality of what we actually ended up doing. We didn't have to notice it publicly is what I'm hearing, but we did talk to the DNR. I don't know if we need to go back and fix those minutes or not, but I caught it. And now when you said it, I thought I was right. There was something a little askew there.
Yeah, I didn't, I'd have to go back and see the minute. I wasn't actually at that meeting. So I don't know. Michael, you have any?
We'll actually look at the what I said, and we have a YouTube tape of it, and we'll reflect it as appropriate. So thanks for bringing that up.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, good presentation, Alan. I didn't have any specific questions on the part you were just covering, but it's making sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So, that's probably in my mind the biggest difficulty with controlling foam in these digesters. It's better after the 11th edition. But the other things is we had digester 5, that same hatch I showed you, had a gasket that needed replaced. So that digester was offline. So that starts contributing to other factors here, that other digesters had to pick up the load that digester 5 wasn't carrying. So that increased the loading there. We were moving stuff around for liquid processing. So that added more sludge being taken in. And then the proportion of waste activated sludge to primary sludge in the digesters, we know from a lot of research in years past that also increases. All of these drive to what I call the propensity to foam. They don't necessarily in and of themselves cause foam, but every one of them is an added risk factor, and it's like, it's kind of like, anything, your health risks or something. The more factors you pile on, the higher risk you may be. And any one of them may not do it for you, but the combination may mean you got to go see your doctor more often. So in this case, all of these factors here contributed to higher risk of foaming for us. Higher waste activated sludge because of how we were pumping in the time of the year. And then we had to add more ferric chloride because we had a generator offline. So we were flaring more. We had to add some ferric chloride for H2S control. So the short of it is it gets really complicated as the root causes of foaming. We don't have the problems that we used to have. I thought I'd close up with things could always be worse. This fortunately predated me. I hope to never see anything like this, but this is digester 7, approximately 2006, 2007. Digester 7 was new in the 10th edition. You can see in the background, this is vehicle loading building, the lagoons vehicle loading building would be right here. To give it some scale, this person out here in waders and this bobcat's putting up an emergency berm. So this is digester 7 came right out the top through the flame arresters. So that was, that's a potential risk to structure and life with the safety equipment going through like that. And it's a lot more than 70 gallons. So this is kind of the example where it's going down the hill, they're berming it up, they're pulling it out with a Metro-Go truck to contain it. And this is, Moreland Road, Southtown Drive coming through here. So this is obviously, we're trying to keep it out of the ditch because that's the kind of thing we would have to notify the public about, that it's escaping the fence line, and there's a potential risk for public contact. To make this worse, digester 7 at this time was being run as what's called an acid phase digester. So that sludge is particularly odorous. So if you think normal biosolids is really got a lot of odor to it, this is much more sharp. So with that, I think I tried to cram a lot there in just a few minutes, but I don't know if there's any questions, comments, concerns from that presentation. Okay.
I don't see it. I just had one question real quick. Does on our compliance report, do they note every time we've reported an overflow? So is that why other communities just don't do it, or does it have to be a certain size and certain impact?
Yeah, it gets real complicated on that. As far as for the upcoming CMAR, it'll be coming up here in about a month. These actually don't factor into that directly. We're looking more at effluent violations and things like that. So these don't typically go into the scoring for that, but they are recorded in the reporting there. So But as far as contributors to score, no, the TFOs don't factor in. I don't believe the SSOs do either, which is the other type of report that we would have to file, which is a sanitary system overflow. I believe they are recorded, but they're not scored, if that makes sense.
Okay, makes sense. Yep. Okay, thank you. I was just curious.
No,
Okay,
good question.
anybody else?
Better stop sharing.
Okay, that will take us to future meeting schedule. That's in the packet, and it sounds like probably in the fall is when we'll be having our first in-person meeting. And then any future agenda topics?
President Hubble, I just want to jump in here and say that remind the members of the commission who will be doing the governance coach training at 10:30 right after this meeting, and all the instructions are in the PDF that's included in the announcement. So we have a half-hour intro session on our governance training.
Right.
So
okay, thank you. Any other business? And do we have a motion to adjourn? I didn't.
I'll move that we adjourn. Murphy.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Murphy, second by.
I'll second. This is Sarah.
Second by Commissioner Eskridge to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, good meeting.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.